Hello, welcome to part three of which country is most responsible for World War One. Part three. Well, I mean it's part three of the whole series. Sorry about that. Anyway, we're looking at part three, and we at the answer. And what I mean is, when we went over part one, and we'll do a screen share, and this will bring you up to part three. So when we did part one, we looked at the situation. We had various countries in Europe with various situations at hand. We know that the emperor, the soon-to-be emperor of Austria and Hungary, the Habsburg monarchy of Austria and Hungary, which dates back to the Middle Ages, was murdered in Sarajevo in the province of there you see it in South Austria-Hungary, in the province of Bosnia-Herzegovina. June 28th, 1914, the Archduke Francis Ferdinand murdered, along with his wife Sophia, by this gang of rabble, these terrorists, Gavrilo Princip firing the shot, which set off a firestorm. Austria-Hungary blaming their southern neighbor Serbia, the Kingdom of Serbia, a Slavic country, Eastern Orthodox country. Austria and Hungary are Catholic country, but blaming Serbia. And they told Serbia, they said, well, okay, you've been agitating against us for years, especially since 1908, when we outright annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina, although they had occupied it by treaty since 1878. And if you watch part one, they told and then as it developed into, because part one just developed really, part one developed where each country stood in 1914, really. Part two developed how the narrative proceeded. So they told Serbia, who is directly east of Bosnia-Herzegovina, this, and right across the river from Austria-Hungary, the Danube, the blue Danube, they said, we know you're responsible because you are agitating against us and you support these terrorist organizations. Serbia's response was, we have no official ties to any of these terrorist organizations, such as the Black Hand, and we don't endorse it. Now, Austria-Hungary's response was, we know you don't have any official ties to these terrorist organizations, but you have unofficial ties. We have the names, we know where they live, we even have their addresses, and we are going to list, and so what happened after this attack, which brought Austria-Hungary into their most severe level of alert in their history. Essentially, it put them at the highest level of alert possible. They said, well, what we're going to do to avoid a problem, we're going to send you a list of recommendations, and we would hope that you would agree with these recommendations, which could alleviate the crisis. Serbia looked at the recommendations, went over them. This was after June 28th. And we know that Russia, there they are, northeast of Austria, the Russian Empire, the Romanov Empire, began to intervene on behalf of Serbia. Now, Austria-Hungary took exception to this because they said, wait a minute, this is a horrible crime. You know these people are involved, and we would appreciate if you did not get involved. But Russia began to threaten Austria, moving troops toward their border as July proceeded, 1914, 108 years ago. What we also learned in part 1 and 2 is that alliances endangered countries. Now, see, the idea at the time was that if you join in a military alliance, it would protect your country. But as we observed, military alliances actually endangered countries by drawing them into conflicts to which they really were not had any interest. Now, here's the German Empire, the Second Reich, the Hohenzollern Empire, established in 1871. Now, we know the First Reich, the first German Empire nation, was the Holy Roman Empire, which began in the year 800, Christmas Day 800, with Charlemagne in Aix-la-Chapelle, or Aachen, I can't say it, Germany, and lasted until 1806, over 1,000 years. Now, but Germany had an alliance with Austria-Hungary, and they thought that would protect them. I don't know why they thought that, because Austria-Hungary was a relatively weak country. It looks big on the map, but in reality they were weak, and there was no way they could actually help Germany, but they could really give Germany a liability, which they did. So Germany says, well, you are our ally. The crime is outrageous, and we're going to support you if you retaliate against Serbia for this murder. And they advised Russia, they said, look, we got a real problem because, and we talked about this in part 1 and 2, the backstory. You're making aggressive moves toward Austria-Hungary. It's a local conflict. It's not going to spread. And Russia say, no, they're going to try to take over Serbia, make it they're going to come under their domination and all of this. And Austria went to the rather remarkable length of publicly stating that they had no interest in compromising the sovereignty of Serbia. They were going to let it remain an independent country, which it had been since 1878. And furthermore, they were not going to take any territory from Serbia in punishment for the crime. They simply wanted to investigate who was behind it and punish the criminals. But then Russia said, no, we don't believe that you're going to take over the country. And they said, no, we're not. Now, the reason Russia was so bold to make a move against Austria, and Germany advised Russia, Germany was very clear. They were very clear. If you look at all the documents, very clear. They said, look, if you make a move against Austria, that means you're making a move against us, because we have an alliance with Austria. We've already told them we're going to defend them in case of war if they're attacked. So you have to understand the serious nature of these moves. And Russia kept saying, oh, no, we're just mobilizing against Austrian provinces, Lviv, Lemberg, Krakow, and our southern provinces around Ukraine, Kiev, Moldavia, Donetsk, where the war is happening right now, and southern Poland. The Germans say that's not the point. You're trying to dance around the point. We know where you're mobilizing. We're telling you that it's going to create a crisis. Now, they said, but we know that the reason you're doing all this is because you signed an agreement with France in the 1890s, by 1895, that if you went to war, they would help you. And if they went to war, you would help them, which we don't understand, because France and Russia have really nothing in common. There's no reason for you to have an alliance. And we perceive that it's an alliance targeted only toward one country, meaning us. Okay, so if you look at the map, you can see Germany is directly in between France to the southwest and Russia to the east. So they said, we really don't feel comfortable with this, Now, Germany and Austria were also in an alliance with Italy, which is even more comical, because Italy and Austria were old enemies. And had a long-running dispute over southwestern territories of Austria, which Italy claimed, and Austria said, well, you can claim them, you're not getting them, but you can claim them all you want. So they're allies, okay? So when this crisis began to erupt, Italy said, oh, well, we're going to see what we can do. Germany and Austria said, can we count on you? And the first response they got from Italy was, we're going to have to look into it. Well, they both knew that meant they're not going to help them, which angered them. But they said, okay, Italy, as long as they stay out of it. But it's very, disgusting, But anyway, and we talked about this in part 1 and 2. Germany was very worried about Russia. They said Russia is a huge country with the world's largest army. If they make a move against us, they could destroy our country, really. And so once they get momentum, and we know in part 1 and 2, they advised France. They went to France and said, look, we have a real serious problem. I mean, it's the worst crisis Germany's ever been involved in. And we've been involved in some pretty bad crises. But, you know, they told France, we have no issue with you, and we have no intention to ever attack you, and we will make a public announcement that we will never attack you. Ever. We'll make that public. They said, but we got a problem because Russia's being totally outrageous, and it looks like they could attack us at any moment, and we may go to war with Russia, which would be a disaster on its own merits. But what we need from you, what we're coming to you about, they told France, what we coming, and I got it in all these documents here. They said, what we're coming to you about is that if we go to war with Russia, we need you to make a statement publicly, of course, that you would not intervene. In other words, you'll remain neutral. Then we could stay at peace, have good relations. You and France and Germany be friends, you know, be great. So then the French start saying, this is leading us up to part 3. Well, we're going to have to look into it. Now, the Germans said, what do you mean look into it? They said, we're going to have to study it, look into it. We'll get back to you, but we're going to look at France's interests. And the Germans kept advising them. They said, well, you have to realize this is developing rather quickly and in a very negative way. We don't really have a whole lot of time, like, well, you can think about it. You're going to look into it. We're going to get back to you later. They said, because really, we can't afford to have Russia attack us from the east, and then we don't know what you're going to do from the west. And to be even more frank, and it's very interesting to read these documents. They said, to be even more frank, if we ask you a simple question like, if we go to war with Russia, are you going to attack us? And you refuse to answer the question. That's leaving us in a real bad position. I mean, an extremely bad position. Because if we ask somebody point blank, are you going to attack us? And they refuse to give us an answer, there's really only one way to consider the answer, which is that we're at war. All right, we're at war, and you can rest assured. And the Germans are very frank. They said you can rest assured that we're going to deal with this crisis in the most explicit manner, in the most decisive manner. And we like France. We love French food. The French people are great. Have wonderful music. Yeah, beautiful buildings. The Eiffel Tower is amazing. But you really might want to consider what's going to happen. You might want to think about that in a very serious way. So the French say, oh, you know, why don't you go eat sausage and drink beer, you know. So the Germans say, this is not good. So, but the Germans know why France is acting this way, because the Germans know about the Entente, the Triple Entente. They know that Great Britain here to the west, the northwest of Europe, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, has an unofficial agreement with France and Russia. Now, the agreement does not say if Russia and France go to war, Great Britain will jump in. The agreement is more along the lines of, if Russia and France have a war, Great Britain will look at the situation and deal with it as they see fit. But the Germans take that as, oh, okay, we know how that works. That means you're going to jump in. Let's go back and look at any comments here. It's going to bring us to the question and the answer. Isle of Fire, he's in Hawaii. He says, Italy may be like the old Romans and Austria like some of the old Gauls. Yeah. In some respects, that's true. I just always remember hearing in history class from growing up that the German type were always a threat to the Roman rule. Yeah, they were like a threat to each other. At first, the Russians were a threat to the Russians. excuse me. At first, the I meant to say at first the Romans were a threat to Germany, but they only took over Belgium and Western Germany, and then like around the Rhineland, and then as it developed, the Germans became a great threat to Russia. I don't know why I keep saying Russia. I guess we hear about Russia on the news every day, to the Romans, and they end up destroying the Roman Empire. The Germans destroyed the Roman Empire. Anyway, I'll be quiet now and listen. You'll be quite, you mean quiet. I only lived in Hawaii for almost 8 years, but I'm back in Michigan now. Oh, okay, you're in Michigan. I'm sorry. I get confused. I get so many viewers, but you're one of the reliable old-time viewers, All right, so back to the story. So Germany was very afraid, became very afraid, and they said to England, they go to United Kingdom, they say to the British, look, and remember the German Emperor, William II, was the grandson of Queen Victoria of Great Britain. And her grandson was the present king, which meant they were first cousins. So the German emperor and the king of England were first cousins. And he says, look, if you declare that you're going to stay out of this, because the local conflict, Austria and Serbia, nobody in the world cares about that. I mean, the murder was horrible. You can understand that they would retaliate, because we know what you would do if your crown prince had been murdered. We know what you would do. You wouldn't send a note asking somebody to consider 12 options. We know how that would go down. But anyway, it would be extremely helpful if you would declare neutrality. Just say you're going to stay neutral. That's it. This is where the question came at the end of part 2. If Great Britain says they're going to stay neutral, the whole conflict stops. This is what Germany says. The whole conflict stops, because the only reason France is standing up to us on behalf of Russia, which is ridiculous. It does nothing for France, but they're trying to get our land. They're trying to get land back from us. But the only reason France is doing this is because they think you're going to jump in and help them. All right. And they say the only reason Russia is doing this is because they think France is going to jump in and help them. So it's a domino effect. You're the key to the riddle. They tell the British this. You're the nexus of the crisis. You have the world's largest navy. You're the most powerful country in the world. You have the most money. And they know if you get involved, they got a chance. But if you don't get involved, they don't have a chance. And if you stay out of it, it doesn't turn into a world war. And in fact, it stays a local conflict. It stays simply Austria-Hungary versus Serbia. And that's the end of it. Because there's no way Russia's coming in without France backing them up. And there's no way France is coming in without you, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, backing them up. So we're begging you. This is what the Germans told them. We're begging you. Because remember, we helped you defeat Napoleon 100 years ago, 99 years ago. We thought we were friends. We don't understand the problem. Now, the answer they got from the British was what? Anybody? Anyone? Anyone want to know what? Anyone want to tell us what the answer was? Scotty? We could say led into it, but they were trying to not get into it. You understand? But that goes back to the whole argument. Alliances do not help you. Now, the United States is in the NATO alliance right now, right? NATO. And what are we told? Oh, NATO protects us. Well, of course, we know NATO does not protect us, and very likely doesn't protect anybody else. It endangers people. But the news say, oh, NATO's good. Österreich, yeah, the Eastern nation country. So Germany was, I wouldn't say led right into it. Maybe if you want to say the word pushed into it would be a better you understand, description. So let's go back to the map, because the map is the most important thing. So the British answer was, well, the answer from the government of King George V was, we're going to look after British interests. Now, the Germans said, that's not a good answer. We're going to look after British interests. That's not an answer that will stop the war. That's an answer that will start a war. The answer needs to be, whatever happens, we're going to stay out of it. We're going to be neutral. It does, and they asked the British, does this involve any British interests? They said no. They admitted that. Serbia and Austria-Hungary, no, nothing whatsoever. We have no interest in that whatsoever. Let them fight. We could care less. They said, okay. So why are you getting involved? And the British said, well, you're a threat to France because you might send your navy around the Netherlands and Belgium and attack the French coast. And the German answer was, well, if you stay neutral, there's not going to be a war. So why would we attack anybody's coast? There's not going to be a war. You're the reason there's going to be a war. Now we're going to look at some documents. Here's Austria's response from July 25th. Count Berchtold, Austria's Minister for Foreign Affairs, says, quote, our note to the powers, the major powers, was in no way intended to invite them to make known their own views on the subject, but merely bore the character of a statement for information, the communication of which we regarded as a duty laid on us by international courtesy. We regarded our action as concerning us and Serbia alone. In other words, what Austria was saying was, we didn't say we would like to have an international conference, or we would like to have a peace conference so that they could dictate the terms to us. We were saying we were doing this as a courtesy to say, look, we have no intention to take any Serbian land, and we don't intend to compromise Serbia's sovereignty. Serbia is going to be an independent country, and we're not going to take their land. But if they refuse to follow the recommendations we gave them, 12 of them, then we will have to take action. I mean, it's, you know, it's what we'll have to do. Now, here he is talking to the Russians, that we had striven up till now, so far as in us lay, to preserve the peace which we considered to be the most precious possession of nations, was shown by the course of events during the last 40 years, and by the historical fact that our gracious emperor has won for himself the glorious title of, quote, the protector of the peace. We should therefore most sincerely deplore the disturbance of the European peace, because we also were of the opinion that the strengthening of the Balkan states in a position of political and national independence would prove to the advantage of our relations with Russia, and would also remove all possibility of antagonism between us and Russia. Also because we have always been ready in the shaping of our own policy to take into consideration the dominant political interests of Russia. Any further toleration of Serbian intrigues, and then they go to Serbia, any further toleration of Serbian intrigues would undermine our existence as a state. So this is what Austria is saying. If we tolerate this, it'll undermine our existence as a state, meaning a country, and our position as a great power, thus also threatening the balance of power in Europe. We are, however, convinced that it is to Russia's own interests, as her peaceful leaders will clearly see, that the existing European balance of power, which is of such importance for the peace of the world, should be maintained. Our action against Serbia, whatever form it takes, is conservative from first to last, and its object is the necessary preservation of our position in Europe. And then he talks about their supposed trying to take over Serbia. He says, by collaboration, in point 5, they wanted to collaborate with the Serbian officials. We are thinking of the establishment of a private Bureau de Suret at Belgrade, which would operate in the same way as the analogous Russian establishments in Paris and in cooperation with the Serbian police and administration. And they instructed other ambassadors as well. Then it goes on and on. Count Portalis, German ambassador at St. Petersburg, handed a note verbal to Mr. Sazonov denying the press report that the action of the Austrian-Hungarian government was instigated by the German government. Because they kept saying, Germany's pushing this, Germany's pushing this. And declaring that this government had no, quote, no knowledge of the text and of the note to Serbia before it was presented, and had exercised no influence upon its contents. Because what they were saying was Germany wrote that note, and then Austria presented it under their title, but Germany had actually written it. And he says this: Germany, as the ally of Austria, naturally supports the claims made by the Vienna cabinet against Serbia, which she considers justified. Above all, Germany wishes, as she has already declared from the very beginning of the Austro-Serbian dispute, that this conflict should be localized. And they made the same statement to the French government, to the British government, and then the German ambassador to England said this. Grey replied, Sir Edward Grey, British Foreign Secretary. Grey replied that this was quite impossible. He added that as long as complications existed between Austria and Serbia alone, British interests were only indirectly affected, but he had to look ahead to the fact that Austrian mobilization would lead to Russian mobilization, and from that moment, a situation would exist in which the interests of all the powers would be involved. In that event, Great Britain reserved to herself full liberty of action. And the Germans said, this is the reason why we're having this crisis, because we all know clearly that it's going to lead to this, like I said, domino effect. You're telling us what we know already. So, well, it goes on and on. I mean, these state papers are amazing. You got to read these. Anybody who's interested in history got to read these papers, you know. All right. Let's move along here. So the Germans said, well, you're gonna send your fleet into the North Sea, and you're going to invade northern France with your navy. Of course, it's funny because France had a larger navy than Germany, so I don't know how they were going to do that. But anyway, the Germans said, tell you what we're going to do. We will publicly declare that we are not going to send our navy into the North Sea and invade France from the north. How about that? You like that? That's putting us at a great disadvantage, because now France knows that they have no threat for their, they face no threat on their northern coast. I don't know too many countries that publicly telegraph their military plans, but we'll do that if you'll just please stay out of it. The British said, well, that's very good. And we have this problem with Belgium. You have to announce that you're not going to go through Belgium to attack France. Now, the Germans said, wait a minute, hold on. We gave you this huge concession that we're announcing what we're not going to do, which no other country would ever do. Great Britain certainly wouldn't. And now you're making another demand that we're not going to go through Belgium, because everybody can look at a map and see that Belgium would be a prime area to maneuver through to get to France. And then we'd just be stuck on the French border between Luxembourg and Switzerland. So basically what you want us to do is announce what we're going to do beforehand so that France will have an advantage and can defeat us in war, even though we don't want to fight them and they're being aggressive towards us. So that's what you're trying to say. And the British say, "Oh, well, we'll have to see. You signed a treaty in 1839. You would never attack Belgium, blah, blah, blah." And then the German ambassador got so, emotional. He said, I cannot believe we're going to have this world war, basically, is what he was saying, and destroy our countries over a scrap of paper. Now, the British said, "Oh," so that was all over the newspapers. That, the scrap of paper statement. The Germans say a treaty is a scrap of paper. But it really wasn't the context in what he meant. It wasn't the context in which he stated it. The Germans didn't say a treaty was a scrap of paper. He got upset because he could see that the whole thing was falling apart. And he was saying, I can't believe, what he was saying, really what he was trying to say was, I can't believe you're going to start a whole world war over this pretext. You went looking at a file cabinet and found a treaty that nobody remembers. And what the Germans meant, what the German ambassador really meant, was you're looking for a pretext. You want to fight. It's obvious you want to attack us. It's pretty obvious, okay? And you keep looking for a pretext. You said North French coast. We said, okay, we're not going to attack it. Oh, so you're coming up with something else. And then if we give in to you on Belgium, then you're going to come up with a third reason. You obviously want to do this, and we cannot, and that's what he meant. We cannot believe, what he really meant was, we cannot believe you're going to start a world war, the worst war in history. And the Germans kept saying this, over a technicality. You're looking for it. You're looking for a casus belli, a cause for war. And the British say, oh, well, you got to follow treaties, like they do, their history. Look at their history. Got to follow treaties, right? Okay, so the Germans said, these people are unreal. These are guys that do anything. They will attack any country. They will do anything. And now they're talking about honor, respect, solemnity, honesty. This is unreal. And they just kept telling the British, what is this? William II, here's a telegram from William II to George V. And this would be on the date of, right before the war, July 31st. The Tsar sent the following telegram to William II, Hohenzollern. I thank you cordially for your mediation, which permits the hope that everything may yet end peacefully. It is technically impossible to discontinue our military preparations, which have been made necessary by the Austrian mobilization. It is far from us to want war. As long as the negotiations between Austria and Serbia continue, my troops will undertake no provocative action. I give you my solemn word thereon. I confide with all my faith in the grace of God, and I hope for the success of your mediation in Vienna for the welfare of our countries and the peace of Europe. The Kaiser sent a telegram, and they crossed, they sent it before they got it. Upon your appeal, this is what Kaiser William says, upon your appeal to my friendship and your request for my aid, I have engaged in mediation between your government and the government of Austria-Hungary. While this action was taking place, your troops were being mobilized against my ally, Austria-Hungary, whereby, as I have already communicated to you, my mediation has become almost illusory. In spite of this, I have continued it, and now I receive reliable news that serious preparations for war are going on my eastern frontier. The responsibility for the security of my country forces me to measures of defense. I have gone to the extreme limit of the possible in my efforts for the preservation of the peace of the world. It is not I who bear the responsibility for the misfortune which now threatens the entire civilized world. It rests in your hands to avert it, your hand to avert it. No one threatens the honor and peace of Russia, which might well have awaited the success of my mediation. The friendship for you and your country bequeathed to me by my grandfather on his deathbed has always been sacred to me, and I have stood faithfully by Russia while it was in serious affliction, especially during its last war, talking about the war with Japan. The peace of Europe can still be preserved by you if Russia decides to discontinue these military preparations which menace Germany and Austria-Hungary. And then Bethmann Hollweg, the German prime minister, chancellor, sent this to their German ambassador in Rome. We have continued to negotiate between Russia and Austria-Hungary through a direct exchange of telegrams between His Majesty the Kaiser and His Majesty the Tsar, as well as in conjunction with Sir Edward Grey. Though through the mobilization of Russia, all our efforts have been greatly handicapped, if they have not become impossible. In spite of pacifying assurances, Russia has taken such far-reaching measures against us that the situation is becoming continuously menacing. So you can see how panicked the Germans are becoming. Then let's move the map over a little bit. The Chancellor telegraphed to his German ambassador in Paris, Russia has ordered mobilization of her entire army and fleet. And this is what set Germany off. They come to find out Russia has mobilized her entire army and fleet, not just against Austria, general mobilization, meaning against Germany too. Therefore, also against us, in spite of our still pending mediation. We have therefore declared the threatened state of war, which is bound to be followed by mobilization unless Russia stops within 12 hours all measures of war against us in Austria. Mobilization inevitably implies war. Please ask the French government whether it intends to remain neutral in a Russo-German war. The reply must be made in 18 hours. Wire at once, hour of inquiry, utmost speed necessary. So now they're saying this has to happen now. You have to tell France it has to happen now. William II telegraphed George V of Great Britain, King George V of the House of what? Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha, a German dynasty. Many thanks for your friendly communication. Your proposals coincide with my ideas and with the communication which I have this evening received from Vienna and which I have passed on to London. I have just heard from the Chancellor that intelligence has just reached him that Nicholas this evening has ordered mobilization of his entire army and fleet. He has not even awaited the result of the mediation in which I am engaged, and he has left me completely without information. I am traveling to Berlin to assure the safety of my eastern frontier, where strong Russian forces have already taken up their position. Ambassador Goshen telegraphed to Sir Edward Grey in England. The German Chancellor informs me, this is Bethmann Hollweg, that his effort to preach peace and moderation at Vienna have been seriously handicapped by the Russian mobilization against Austria. He has done everything possible to attain his object at Vienna, perhaps even rather more than was altogether palatable at the ball plots. He could not, however, leave his country defenseless while time was being utilized by other powers, and if, as he learns the case, military measures are now being taken by Russia against Germany also, which in fact was the case, it would be impossible for him to remain quiet. He wished to tell me that it was quite possible that in a very short time, today perhaps, the German government would take some very serious step. He was in fact just on the point of going to have an audience with the emperor. So, when we look at these things, if you watch television and you read common books, His His Excellency, can't read it, His Excellency added that the news of the active preparations on the Russo-German frontier had reached him just when the Tsar had appealed to the emperor in the name of their old friendship to mediate at Vienna, and when the emperor was actually conforming to that request. So he said it's unreal. The Russians said, could you intervene? At the same exact time, the Russians are mobilizing against the German frontier. And the Germans say, what are you talking about? It's like you're pointing a gun at my head and saying, you think you could work it out? So when we watch television and read common books, they say what? What do they always say? Who started the war? We all know what they say. Those bad guys. Those bad people. But actually, as we can see, those bad people, those Germans, those Austrians and Germans, were trying to stop the war. I mean, all the evidence points toward that. I mean, it's very clear. They were trying to stop the war, not start a war, stop the war. So you better think about, let's think about that when we assign blame. And I think we know who the villain, the real villain is here. A country that did not need to be involved. A country who they begged to not be involved, pleaded with, and they kept making outrageous demands on the antagonists, and who very obviously wanted to be involved and was using any excuse to get involved in it. So when you ask me if you ask me who is the country with the most responsibility for starting the First World War, which leads to the second, and of course we know the First World War leads to the Second World War, which leads to the present World War, which the battlefield in Ukraine today, we know this. We would have to say that the chief responsibility is in London, the chief antagonist is Great Britain, the chief villain is the British and the British Empire, King George V and his government. They're the chief villain in the war. There's no other answer. So when someone asks you who is the country that started World War I or the First World War, or more accurately, the World War Part One, you can say, oh, it's Great Britain. They caused it. And you would be correct. Okay. Let's see it. Let's look at the good comments at least. Let's see. So what kind of comments here? Himmler. Why are they talking about Himmler? Okay. Ronnie S. Yeah, I don't think Austria was really irresponsible, because they were the one who were attacked, But Austria was just caught up in it, It was a local conflict. Yeah, they were all related. Right. Ronnie's right. They destroyed their families and they destroyed Europe. Yes, King of the Dots, Gary. I was a history teacher. Yes, close family. Now you're talking about Heinrich Himmler. We're not here to talk about Heinrich Himmler. Ronnie, yes, which country is most responsible for the present World War III? The United States of America. Well, of course, you're right. Let's see. They're talking about all kind of different things. Peter Bruin. It was a farce. Yeah, if you watch the news, it's all Germany. They're bad. They're bad. They love war. Now, in some ways, that's true because they thought militarism would protect them. And Prussia was a militaristic country. Everybody knows that, or should know that. They had gotten involved in wars like the Napoleonic Wars. Well, I mean, you're going to get involved in that whether you want to, because Napoleon was going to attack everybody regardless, you know. But they just had this idea that a big navy and a big army and being a world power was going to protect them. Well, we can see it did not. It didn't protect them in the first run, the first go round, 1914 to 1918, and it did not protect them in the second go round, 1939 to 1945. So these big armies and navies did not protect Germany, and these alliances did not protect them, and they don't protect anyone else either, by the way. Well, yeah, Germany tried to get the Ottoman Empire involved, and the Ottoman Empire was stupidly, they had stupidly allowed themselves to get involved. But anyway, so there's your answer. We went through 3 parts. Himmler, and they were referring to Wilhelm. Yeah, I don't know what they were talking about. But you get these things get all off track. All right, anyway, so we've answered the question. We went through part 1. The background, part 2, what happened, and part 3, the answer. And the answer is who was, and I'm not saying that all the other countries weren't responsible. Don't take this the wrong way. France, very responsible. They share a lot of the blame. I mean, they got what they deserved. Russia, they're responsible. They deserve it. They share the blame and they got what they deserve. Austria-Hungary, probably the least guilty party. Serbia, very, very involved criminally. They knew they were supporting these terrorist groups, and they were involved in all kind of hijinks, and they knew it, and everybody else knew it. Germany, they were responsible in the sense that they thought alliances were going to protect them. We're going to protect them. As we can see, the alliances endangered them. Think about it. If Germany had remained a neutral country, like Switzerland, taking no sides, they wouldn't have got involved in World War I at all. They'd be maybe the most powerful country in the world today. But they had the wrong idea, and they followed the wrong examples, such as Great Britain and the British thought they were gonna. Well, see, the British now, they're at the top of the pyramid, so they used alliances to protect themselves. You see what I'm saying? They didn't get. See, you have to have a different perspective with them. They don't think alliances protect them. They create alliances as a vehicle for control. So, you know, when it's like a spider, you know, with all the legs, when you're running the show, when you're the marionette, you know, when you're running the puppet show, you're creating this and you're creating that, and you're manipulating this and that. So they're at a different level. You know, the Germans were a little bit lower on the pyramid of understanding what was happening, and they never did seem to really understand what was happening in 1914 or 1939. What's next for Ukraine, in my opinion? I really don't know. I can't say. I don't know. I got some ideas, but I really don't know what's going to happen. I wish I could say I know and I could predict it, but I do not know. Sorry, Joseph. I thought I knew, but I didn't know. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and great series. Everything that happens now goes back to July 28, 1914. Believe me, it all goes back to that. It goes back to that. It really goes back to July 14, 1789. July 14, 1789. But at least it goes back to July 28, 1914. If you want to understand what's happening now, you better understand what happened then, or you won't understand what's happening now. That's not possible. Oh, yeah, you missed part 1 and 2, JV. You got to watch them. And you missed part 3. Well, you can watch the replay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. And y'all have a good night.